Hey Fan Gang, hope you had a fantastic Monday. Let me put on my reading glasses, because today we are continuing to read Dracula by Bram Stoker. Let us bring that up. We are on chapter 11 of 27, if I remember right. It's gonna be a longer stream today, so don't have work because of the holiday. Happy holidays, whichever one you participate in. Doesn't matter to me. I don't participate. My participation is how I get a day off work. That's all I care about, man. But longer stream today. We'll see how many chapters we get through. This is gonna be the big Dracula stream where I try to get as many in as I can. Chapters, that is. And then I think we'll have 5 or 6 days left in the month to read. Ideally, I'll get Dracula finished by the end of October, but I'm fine if it continues into November. But I want to get it done soonish, rather than laterish. Let me change the music over. Do the vampire music. 5 in Dutch. The ever lovely. Alright. Chapter 11 in Dracula. Lucy Westenra's diary on the 12th of September. How good they all are to me. I should probably recap a little what happened last time. There was a series of blood transfusions from Dr. Van Helsing and Dr. Seward trying to save Lucy's life. And Dracula kept sucking her dry, because he's an asshole. And now this is post that, with Van Helsing himself keeping vigil over Lucy to keep shoo Dracula away with a broom or something, I don't know. Anyways, chapter 11, Lucy Westenra's diary. The 12th of September. How good they all are to me. I quite love that dear Dr. Van Helsing. Don't get too sweet on him. I wonder why he was so anxious about these flowers. That's right, those flowers are the garlic that he brought in and hung around Lucy like a wreath, and also all around the room. Fun vampire fact. Vampires were originally known as Strigoi in Romania. And one of the folksy ways to keep them at bay was to, like a sort of medieval carpet, use garlic braids to cover your floor. Which I'm sure just made the house smell wonderful. As a vampire, I probably shouldn't like garlic as much as I do, but even that sounds pretty disgusting, to be honest. He positively frightened me. He was so fierce, and yet he must have been right, for I feel comfort from them already. Somehow, I do not dread being alone tonight, and I can go to sleep without fear. I should not mind any flapping outside the window. Oh, the terrible struggle that I have had against sleep so often of late. The pain of the sleeplessness, or the pain of the fear of sleep. With such unknown horrors as it has for me. How blessed are some people whose lives have no fears, no dreads, to whom sleep is a blessing that comes nightly and brings nothing but sweet dreams. Well, here I am tonight, hoping for sleep, and lying like Ophelia in the play, with virgin crants and maid instruments. I never liked garlic before, but tonight is delightful. There's peace in its smell. I feel sleep coming already. Good night, everybody. Everybody in her journal? Okay. Dr. Stewart's diary on the 13th of September. What was the last entry before this? That was a long passage, though. 11, so it's been a day or two. 13th of September from Dr. Seward. Called at the Berkeley and found Van Helsing, as usual, up to time. The carriage ordered from the hotel was waiting. The professor took his bag, which he always brings with him now. Let all be put down exactly. Van Helsing and I arrived at Hillingham at 8 o'clock. It was a lovely morning. The bright sunshine and all the fresh feeling of early autumn seemed like a completion of nature's annual work. The leaves were turning to all kinds of beautiful colors, but had not yet begun to drop from the trees. When we entered, we met Mrs. Westenra coming out of the morning room. She is always an early riser. She greeted us warmly and said, "You will be glad to know that Lucy is better. The dear child is still asleep, I looked into her room and saw her, but did not go in, lest I should disturb her. The professor smiled, but looked quite jubilant. He rubbed his hands together and said, "Aha! I thought I had diagnosed the case. My treatment is working." To which she answered, "You must not take all the credit to yourself, Doctor. Lucy's state this morning is due in part to me." "How do you mean, ma'am?" asked the professor. "Well, I was anxious about the dear child tonight and went into her room. She was sleeping soundly, so soundly that even my coming did not wake her. But the room was awfully stuffy. Oh, come on, Mrs. Westenra. You know where this is going. There were a lot of those horrible, strong-smelling flowers about everywhere, and she had actually a bunch of them around her neck. I feared that the heavy odor would be too much for the dear child in her weak state, so I took them all away and opened a bit of the window to let in a little fresh air. You'll be pleased with her, I am sure." She moved off into her boudoir, where she usually breakfasted early. As she had spoken, I watched the professor's face and saw it turn ashen gray. He had been able to retain his self-command whilst the poor lady was present, for he knew her state and how mischievous a shock would be. Mrs. Westenra is due to die because of heart problems or something. He actually smiled on her as he held open the door for her to pass into her room, but the instant she had disappeared, he pulled me, suddenly and forcibly, into the dining room and closed the door. Then, for the first time in my life, I saw Van Helsing break down. He raised his hands over his head in a sort of mute despair, and then beat his palms together in a helpless way. Finally, he sat down on a chair and, putting his hands before his face, began to sob with loud, dry sobs that seemed to come from the very racking of his heart. Then he raised his arms again, as though appealing to the whole universe. Shouldn't they go check on Lucy first? Go check on Lucy. God, 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 he said. What have we done? Why has this poor thing done that we are so sore beset? Is there a fate amongst us still, sent down from the pagan world of old, that such things must be, and in such way? This poor mother, all unknowing, and all for the best as she think, does such thing as lose her daughter, body and soul. Did I say Dottie? But we must not tell her. We must not even warn her, or she die, and then both die. Oh, how we are beset. How are all the powers of the devils against us? Suddenly, he jumped to his feet. Come, he said. Come, we must see and act. Devils or no devils, or all the devils at once. It matters not. We fight him all the same. He went to the hall door for his bag, and together we went up to Lucy's room. Once again, I drew up the blind, whilst Van Helsing went towards the bed. This time, he did not start as he looked on the poor face, with the same awful, waxen pallor as before. He wore a look of stern sadness and infinite pity. As I expected, he murmured, with that hissing inspiration of his which meant so much. Without a word, he went and locked the door, and then began to set out on the little table the instruments for yet another operation of transfusion of blood. I had long ago recognized the necessity and begun to take off my coat, but he stopped me with a warning hand. No, he said. Today, you must operate. I shall provide. You are weakened already. As he spoke, he took off his coat and rolled up his shirt sleeve. Again the operation. Again the narcotic. Again some return of color to the ashy cheeks and the regular breathing of healthy sleep. This time, I watched whilst Van Helsing recruited himself and rested. Presently, he took an opportunity of telling Mrs. Westenra that she must not remove anything from Lucy's room without consulting him, that the flowers were of medicinal value, and that the breathing of their odor was a part of the system of cure. Then he took over the care of the case himself, saying that he would watch this night and the next, and would send me word when to come. I was about to say when Lucy had come to. No. Word when to come. After another hour, Lucy waked from her sleep, fresh and bright, and seemingly not much the worse for her terrible ordeal. What does it all mean? I am beginning to wonder if my long habit of life amongst insane is beginning to tell upon my own brain. This is Henry, you dumb bitch. Killing your daughter! It's the third blood transfusion that poor Lucy has had to have, all from different people. I mean, I guess they're lucky that everyone in Britain has the same blood type, apparently. God damn. Lucy Westenra's diary, not Lucy's. On the 17th, a few days later now. 4 days and nights of peace. I'm getting so strong again that I hardly know myself. It is as if I had passed through some long nightmare and had just awakened to see the beautiful sunshine and feel the fresh air of the morning around me. I have a dim half-remembrance of long, anxious times, of waiting and fearing. Darkness in which there is not even the pain of hope to make present distress more poignant, and then long spells of oblivion and the rising back to life as a diver coming up through a great press of water. Since, however, Dr. Van Helsing has been with me, all this bad dreaming seems to have passed away. The noises that used to frighten me out of my wits, the flapping against the windows, the distant voices which seemed so close to me, the harsh sounds that came from I know not where and commanded me to do I know not what, have all ceased. I go to bed now without any fear of sleep. I do not even try to keep awake. I have grown quite fond of the garlic, and a boxful arrives for me every day from Haarlem. Haarlem. 2 ways. That's fun to say, actually. Haarlem. Tonight, Dr. Van Helsing is going away, as he has to be for a day in Amsterdam. But I need not be watched. I am well enough to be... Do not leave Lucy alone with her mother. God damn. Left alone. Thank God for mother's sake, and dear Arthur's, and for all our friends who have been so kind. I shall not even feel the change, for last night, Dr. Van Helsing slept in his chair a lot of the time. I found him asleep twice when I awoke, but I did not fear to go to sleep again, although the booze or bats or something napped almost angrily against the window panes. Oh, we're changing. This is another, I think this is the second of news articles, maybe the third. The last one was about the shipwreck that Dracula seemed to arrive on. The Pall Mall Gazette, 18th of September, titled The Escaped Wolf. Subtitle, Perilous Adventure of Our Interviewer. Interview with the Keeper in the Zoological Gardens. After many inquiries and almost as many refusals, and perpetually using the words Pall Mall Gazette as a sort of talisman, I managed to find the keeper of the section of the Zoological Gardens in which the wolf department is included. Thomas Builder lives in one of the cottages in the enclosure behind the elephant house. He must like the smell of elephant shit, and was just sitting down to his tea when I found him. Thomas and his wife, while I sit up. There we go. Thomas and his wife are hospitable folk, elderly and without children. And if the specimen I enjoyed of their hospitality be the average kind, their lives must be pretty comfortable. The keeper would not enter on what he called business until the supper was over and we were all satisfied. Then, when the table was cleared and he had lit his pipe, he said, "Now, sir, you can go on and ask me what you want. You'll excuse me for refusing to talk of professional subjects afore meals. I gives the wolves and jackals and the hyenas and all our section their tea before I begins to ask them the questions." "Hey, Wild Marjoram, thanks for dropping by." "How do you mean, ask them questions?" I queried, wishful to get him into a talkative humor. Hitting of them over the head with a pole is one way. Scratching of their ears. Scratching of their ears is another. When gents' flesh wants a bit of show or their gals. I don't so much mind the fuss. The hitting with the pole before I chucks in their dinner, but I waits till they've had their sherry and coffee, so to speak, before I tries with the ear scratching, mind you. He added, philosophically, there's a deal of the same nature in us as in them there animals. Here's you a coming and asking of me questions about my business, and I and that grumpy like, that only for you bloomin' arfquid. What? I had to seen you blowed fuss before I'd answer. English folksy is something different. Not even when you arst me the sarcastic like, if I'd like you to arst the superintendent, if you might arst me the questions. Without offense. I tell you to get to hell. Tell you to go to hell. You did? And when you said you report me for using obscene language, that was hitting me over the head, but the arfquid okay, made that alright. And I weren't going to fight, so I waited for the food, and did what my outlaws the wolves, and the lions, and the tigers does. But Lord love your art. Now the old woman has stuck a chunk in her tea cake in me, and it rinsed me out with her bloomin' old teapot, and I've lit up. You may scratch my ears for all your worth, and you won't get even a growl out of me. Drive along with your questions. I know what you're coming at. That air escaped, wolf. Exactly. I want you to give me... folksy. What the hell does arfquid mean? Exactly. I want you to give me your view of it. Just tell me how it happened. And when I know the facts, I get you to say what you consider was the cause of it. And how you think the whole affair will end. Alright, Governor. This here about the old story. There was the wolf we called Berserker. Really? It was one of the 3 gray ones that came from Norway to Jamrix, which we bought off him 4 years ago. He was a nice, well-behaved wolf that never gave no trouble to talk of. I'm more surprised at him for wanting to get out nor any other animal in the place. But there, you can't trust wolves no more nor women. Don't you mind him, sir, broke in Mrs. Tom with a cheery laugh. He's got minding the animals so long that blessed if he ain't like an old wolf himself, but there ain't no harm in him. Well, sir, it was about 2 hours after feeding yesterday when I first hear my disturbance. I was making up a litter in the monkey house for a young puma, which is ill. But when I heard the yelping and the owling, I keep him straight. I kept him away straight. There was a berserker tearing like a mad thing at the bars, as if he wanted to get out. There wasn't much people about that day, and close to hand was only one man, a tall thin chap, with a hook nose and a pointed beard, with a few white hairs run through it. We had a hard, cold look and red eyes, and I took a sort of mislike to him, for it seemed as if it was him they was irritated at. He had white kid gloves on in his hands, which he pointed out the animals to me and says, Keeper, these wolves seem upset at something. That's totally Dracula. Maybe it's you, says I. For I did not like the airs as he gives himself. He didn't get angry, as I hoped he would, but he smiled a kind of insolent smile, with a mouth full of white, sharp teeth. Oh no, they wouldn't like me, he says. Ah, yes, they would, says I, imitating him. They always like a bone or two to clean their teeth on about tea time, with you as a bagful. Good tea today. Well, it was an odd thing. When the animals sees us talking, they laid down. But when I went over to Berserker, he let me stroke his ears same as ever. That there man came over and blessed, but if he didn't put his hand and stroke the old wolf's ears too. Take care, says I. Berserker is quick. Never mind, he says. I'm used to him. Are you in the business yourself? I says, taking him off my hat. For a man that trades wolves, Ansater is a good friend to keepers. No, says he. Not exactly in the business, but I have made pets of several. And with that, he lifts his hat as a purblitter as the Lord and walks away. Old Berserker kept a looking arter him till he was out of sight, then went and laid down in a corner and and wouldn't come out the whole evening. Well, last night, so as soon as the moon was up, the wolves here all began howling. There were nothing from the owl at. Weren't no one near, except someone that was evidently calling a dog somewhere out back the gardens of the park road. Once or twice, I went out to see that all was right, and it was, and the owling stopped. Just before 12 o'clock, I just took a look round before turning in and bust me. But when I came opposite to old Berserker's cage, I see the rails broken and twisted about, and the cage empty. And that's all I know for certain. Hey, Neve. Hope you're doing good. These accents. Did anyone else see anything? Don't ask him more questions. I don't like this accent. One of our gardeners was coming out that time from armory, when he sees a big gray dog coming out through the garden edges. At least so he says. But I don't give much for it myself, and if he did, he ever said a word about it to his missus when he got him home. And it was only after the escape of the wolf was made known that we had been up all night a hunting of the park for Berserker that he remembered seeing anything. My own belief was that the harmony had gotten his head. Now, Mr. Builder, can you account in any way for the escape of the wolf? Well, sir, he said, with a suspicious sort of modesty. I think I can, but I don't know as how you be satisfied with the theory. Certainly, I shall, if a man like you, who knows the animals from experience, can't hazard a good guess at any rate. Who is even to try? Well then, sir, I accounts for it this way. It seems to me that your wolf escaped simply because he wanted to get out. From the hearty way that both Thomas and his wife laughed at the joke, I could see that had done service before, that the whole explanation was simply an elaborate sell. I couldn't cope in badinage with the worthy Thomas, but I thought I knew a surer way to his heart, so I said, "Now, Mr. Builder, we'll consider that first half sovereign worked off, and this brother of his is waiting to be claimed when you've told me what you think will happen." "Right you are, sir," he said briskly. "You'll excuse me, I know, for chaffing of you, but the old woman here winked at me, which is never much of telling me to go on." "Why, I never," said the old lady. "My opinion is this, there wolf is hiding, of somewheres. The gardener what don't remember said he was galloping northward faster than a horse could go, but I don't believe him, for you see, sir, wolves don't gallop no more than dogs does. They'd not be built that way. Wolves is fine things in the storybook, and I dessay, when they gets in packs and does be chivying something that's more feared than they is, they can make a devil of a noise and chop it up, whatever it is. But Lord bless you, in real life, a wolf is only a low creature, not half so clever as a bold or as a good dog, and not half a quarter so much fighting him. This one ain't been used to fighting, or even to providing for herself, and more like he's somewhere around a park of hiding and shivering of, and if he thinks at all, wondering where he is to get his breakfast from. Or maybe he's got down some area is in a coal cellar. My, once some cook get a rum start, which sees his green eyes a shining at her from out of the dark. If he can't get food, he's bound to look for it, and mayhap he may chance to light on the butcher shop in time. If he doesn't, and some nursemaid goes walking her with a soldier, leaving an infant at ambulator, well then I shouldn't be surprised if the census is one baby less, that's all. That accent. I can talk folksy, but I get tired of it after a page. I was handing him the half-sovereign when something came bobbing up against the window, and Mr. Builder's face doubled its natural length in surprise. "God bless me," he said, "if there ain't old Berserker come back by himself." He went to the door and opened it, a most unnecessary proceeding as it seemed to me. I have always thought a wild animal never looks so well as when some obstacle of pronounced durability is between us. A personal experience has intensified rather than diminished that idea. After all, however, there is nothing like custom, for neither Builder nor his wife thought any more of the wolf than I should of a dog. The animal itself was as peaceful and well behaved as that father of all picture wolves. Excuse me. Red Riding Hood's quondam friend, whilst moving her confidence in masquerade. The whole scene was an unutterable mixture of comedy and pathos. The wicked wolf, that for a half day had paralyzed London, set all the children in the town shivering in their shoes, was there in a sort of penitent mood, and was received and petted like a sort of vulpine prodigal son. Old Builder examined him all over with most tender solicitude, and when he had finished with his penitent, said, "Oh, here we go again. There, I know the poor old chap will get into some kind of trouble. Then I say all along, there's his head all cut and full of broken glass. He's been getting over some blooming wall or another. As a shame these people are allowed to top their walls with broken bottles. This here's what comes of it. Come along, Berserker." He took the wolf and locked him up in a cage with a piece of meat that satisfied in quantity at any rate the elementary conditions of the fattened calf. They went off to report. I came off too, to report the only exclusive information that is given today regarding the strange escapade at the zoo. I remember earlier in the book that Dracula had some kind of control over the wolves in the mountains. So I'm guessing that Dracula broke out Berserker being the wolf, for something, but then didn't need him, so he let Berserker go home? Something like that. And that was on the 18th of September. And this is back to the 17th with Dr. Seward's diary. This was a zookeeper or something like that, because he was talking about elephant houses and monkeys and pumas. Although I think it weird that he's talking about a wolf as being docile in any way. I mean, I guess they can be trained because they're still dogs in a sense, but it seems like a naive way to describe a wolf, in the least. Dr. Seward's diary on the 17th of September. I was engaged after dinner in my study posting up my books, which, through press of other work and the many visits to Lucy, had fallen sadly into arrear. Suddenly, the door was burst open, and in rushed my patient, with his face distorted with passion. I was thunderstruck. I forget how the AC/DC song goes. For such a thing as a patient getting of his own accord into the superintendent's study is almost unknown. Without an instant's pause, he made straight at me. He had a dinner knife in his hand, and, as I saw he was dangerous, I tried to keep the table between us. He was too quick and too strong for me, however, for before I could get my balance, he had struck at me and cut my left wrist rather severely. I don't know what I was trying to say there. My mouth is still stuck on that folksy accent. Wolves are actually pretty chill when growing up in a zoo. I can see them being more chill, but they're still wolves. Because there's I don't know if they're genetic, but it's just inherited instincts that they have as a wild animal that isn't domesticated. Because it's a phenomenon in recent decades where they being groups of scientists in Russia and America collaborating have been breeding and domesticating foxes, breeding them, favoring the traits that make them more chill to humans, which also is in the process making them look more and more like dogs, coincidentally, with dog-like traits instead of the traditional fox traits. I forget how that relates to what we were talking about. Something about wolves. I don't know. Anyways, moving on. Where was I? He was too quick and too strong for me, however. For before I could get my balance, he had struck at me and cut my left wrist rather severely. Before he could strike again, however. I got in my right, and he was sprawling on his back on the floor. My wrist bled freely, and quite a little pool trickled onto the carpet. I saw that my friend was not intent on further effort, and occupied myself binding up my wrist, keeping a wary eye on the prostrate figure all the time. When the attendants rushed in, and we turned our attention to him, his employment positively sickened me. He was lying on his belly on the floor, licking up like a dog, the blood which had fallen from my wounded wrist. He was easily secured, and, to my surprise, went with the attendants quite placidly, simply repeating over and over again, "The blood is the life. The blood is the life." I cannot afford to lose blood just at present. I've lost too much of late for my physical good, and then the prolonged strain of Lucy's illness in its horrible phases is telling on me. I am overexcited and weary, and I need rest, rest, rest. Happily, Van Helsing has not summoned me, so I need not forgo my sleep. Tonight, I could not well do without it. Bog's dogs? Yeah. I forget what exactly the traits they're getting as they're being domesticated are. I think it's rounded floppy ears, something like that. Telegram, also as a kind of as a joke, the Russians have been simultaneously breeding anti-human foxes that are extremely hostile, just as I guess a counterexample for the other extreme that they're doing. So they just have like caged asshole foxes that are super violent towards humans, and it's all just from the breeding process for certain traits. Telegram from Van Helsing in Antwerp to Seward, Carfax.com. Sent to Carfax.com, Sussex, as no county given. Delivered late by 22 hours. 17th of September. Do not fail to be at Hillingham tonight. If not watching all the time frequently, visit and see that flowers are as placed. Very important. Do not fail. Shall be with you as soon as possible after arrival. Dr. Seward's diary on the next day, the 18th of September. Just off for train to London. The arrival of Van Helsing's telegram filled me with dismay. A whole night lost. I know by bitter experience what may happen in a night. Of course, it is possible that all may be well, but what may have happened? Surely there's some horrible doom hanging over us that every possible accident should thwart us in all we try to do. I shall take this cylinder with me, and then I can complete my entry on Lucy's phonograph. I think the cylinder being like a little cartridge they use for the something phone. The old-fashioned big earpiece things that they would talk into to record their voices on wax or something back in the day. In previous entries. I keep wanting to say saxophone, but it's not that. Saxophone is the musical instrument. Memorandum. Did she die? Is that... I have to look up... What the hell does memorandum mean? I forget. Memorandum meaning. A short note written as a reminder. Okay. For a second I was thinking memorandum mean like a note left by a dead person? No, it's not that. Gramophone, that's it, thank you. Memorandum left by Lucy Westenra on the 17th of September. The night before. What night did Dracula take the wolf? The 17th or so. Okay. So 17th of September. Night. I write this and leave it to be seen, so that no one may by any chance get into trouble through me. This is an exact record of what took place tonight. I feel I am dying of weakness and have barely strength to write, but it must be done if I die in the doing. I went to bed as usual, taking care that the flowers were placed as Dr. Van Helsing directed, and soon fell asleep. I was waked by the flapping at the window, which had begun after that sleepwalking on the cliff at Whitby when Mina saved me. Mina being Jonathan Harker's wife, Mina went to Budapest to help nurse John Harker back to health after he escaped from Castle Dracula, when Dracula left him there to die with the other vampires while Dracula was piecing out to England to retire next to a lunatic asylum. This the story has had some legs. Where was I? I was wakened by the flapping. Mina saved me, in which now I know so well. I was not afraid, but I did wish that Dr. Seward was in the next room, as Dr. Van Helsing said he would be, but I might have called him. I tried to go to sleep, but could not. Then there came to me the old fear of sleep, and I determined to keep awake. Perversely, sleep would try to come then when I did not want it. So as I feared to be alone, I opened my door and called out, "Is anybody there?" There was no answer. I was afraid to wake Mother, and so closed my door again. Then, outside in the shrubbery, I heard a sort of howl like a dog's, but more fierce and deeper. I went to the window and looked out, but could see nothing except a big bat, which had evidently been buffeting its wings against the window. So I went back to bed again, but determined not to go to sleep. Presently, the door opened, and Mother looked in. Seeing by my moving that I was not asleep, came in and sat by me. She said to me even more sweetly and softly than her wont, "I was uneasy about you, darling, and came in to see that you were all right. I feared she might catch cold sitting there, and asked her to come in and sleep with me. So she came into my bed and laid down beside me. She did not take off her dressing gown, for she said she would only stay a while and then go back to her own bed. As she lay there in my arms and I in hers, the flapping and the buffeting came to my window again. She was startled and a little frightened and cried out, 'What is that?' I tried to pacify her and at last succeeded, and she lay quiet, but I could hear her poor, dear heart still beating terribly. After a while, there was a low howl again out in the shrubbery, and shortly after, there was a crash at the window and a lot of broken glass was hurled on the floor. The window blind blew back with the wind that rushed in, and in the aperture of the broken panes there was the head of a great, gaunt, gray wolf. Mother cried out in fright and struggled up into a sitting posture and clutched wildly at anything that would help her. Amongst other things, she clutched the wreath of flowers that Dr. Van Helsing insisted on my wearing round my neck and tore it away from me. For a second or two, she sat up, pointing at the wolf, and there was a strange, horrible gurgling in her throat. Then she fell over as if struck with lightning, and her head hit my forehead and made me dizzy for a moment or two. The room all around seemed to spin round. I kept my eyes fixed on the window, but the wolf drew his head back, and a whole myriad of little specks seemed to be come blowing in through the broken window, and wheeling and circling round like a pillar of dust that travelers describe when there is a moon in the desert. I tried to stir, but there was some spell upon me, and dear Mother's poor body, which seemed to grow cold already, for her dear heart had ceased to beat, weighed me down, and I remembered no more for a while. Well, she's fucking dead. The time did not seem long, but very, very awful, till I recovered consciousness again. Somewhere near, a passing bell was tolling. The dogs all around the neighborhood were howling, and in our shrubbery, seemingly just outside, a nightingale was singing. I was dazed and stupid, with pain and terror and weakness, but the sound of the nightingale seemed like the voice of my dead mother come back to comfort me. The sound seemed to have awakened the maids too, for I could hear their bare feet pattering outside my door. I called to them, and they came in, and when they saw what had happened, and what it was that lay over me on the bed, they screamed out. The wind rushed in through the broken window, and the door slammed to. They lifted off the body of my dear mother, and laid her, covered up with a sheet, on the bed after I had got up. They were all so frightened and nervous that I directed them to go to the dining room and have each a glass of wine. The door flew open for an instant and closed again. The maid shrieked, and then went in a body to the dining room, and I laid what flowers I had on my dear mother's breast. When they were there, I remembered that Dr. Van Helsing had told me, but I didn't like to remove them. And besides, I would have some of the servants to sit up with me now. I was surprised that the maids did not come back. I called them, but got no answer. So I went to the dining room to look for them. You actually smacked your head into someone else's? Yeah, headbutting people, it sucks. It's an easy way to get a concussion for both of you. It's not a good time. Because a concussion is just the brain floating in its fluid in your skull, smashing against the interior of your skull. That's what a concussion is. It's horrible. So headbutting people is a really fast way to do that. My heart sank when I saw what had happened. They all four lay helpless on the floor, breathing heavily. The decanter of sherry was on the table half full, but there was a queer, acrid smell of laudanum. Acrid smelled about. I skipped a line. I was suspicious and examined the decanter. It smelt of laudanum. And looking on the sideboard, I found that the bottle, which Mother's doctor uses for her, was empty. What am I to do? What am I to do? I am back in the room with Mother. I cannot leave her, and I am alone, save for the sleeping servants, whom someone has drugged. Alone with the dead. I dare not go out, for I can hear the low howl of the wolf through the broken window. The air seems full of specks, floating and circling in the draught from the window, and the lights burn blue and dim. What am I to do? God shield me from harm this night. I shall hide this paper in my breast, where they shall find it when they come to lay me out. My dear mother is gone. It is time that I go too. Goodbye, dear Arthur. I shall not survive this night. God keep you, dear. God help me. I think Lucy might still be alive. That's definitely it for Mrs. Westenra. On to Chapter 12, starting with Dr. John Seward. Back on the 18th of September. I drove at once to Hillingham and arrived early. Keeping my cab at the gate, I went up the avenue alone. I knocked gently and rang as quietly as possible, for I feared to disturb Lucy or her mother, and hoped to only bring a servant to the door. After a while, finding no response, I knocked and rang again. Still no answer. I cursed the laziness of the servants that they should lie abed at such an hour. For it was now 10 o'clock. I can't judge. I don't get up until like noon. It is what it is. But still, without response. Hitherto, I had blamed only the servants, but now a terrible fear began to assail me. Was this desolation but another link in the chain of doom which seemed drawing tight around us? Was it indeed a house of death to which I had come too late? I knew that minutes, even seconds of delay might mean hours of danger to Lucy if she had had again one of those frightful relapses. And I went around the house to try if I could find by any chance an entry anywhere. I could find no means of ingress. Every window and door was fastened and locked, and I returned baffled to the porch. As I did so, I heard the rapid pit-pat of a swiftly driven horse's feet. They stopped at the gate, and a few seconds later I met Van Helsing running up the avenue. When he saw me, he gasped out, "Then it was you, and just arrived. How is she? Are we too late? Did you not get my telegram?" I answered as quickly and coherently as I could that I had only got his telegram early in the morning and had not lost a minute coming here, and I could not make anyone in the house hear me. He paused and raised his hat, at which he said solemnly, "And I fear we are too late. God's will be done." With his usual recuperative energy, he went on, "Come, if there be no way open to get in, we must make one. Time is all in us. Time is all. Why does he talk this way? Time is all in all to us now." Okay, that sentence makes no damn sense to me. I get the meaning, but it makes no sense trying to parse that. Time is all in all to us. Whatever, I'm moving on. I like Van Helsing, but something about the way people from Amsterdam talk, apparently. God damn. We went round to the back of the house, where there was a kitchen window. The professor took a small surgical saw from his case and, handing it to me, pointed to the iron bars which guarded the window. I don't think a surgical saw is going to do jack to iron bars, man. I attacked them at once and had very soon cut through 3 of them. Okay, go off. Go off, King. Then with a long, thin knife, we pushed back the fastening of the sashes and opened the window. I helped the professor in and followed him. There was no one in the kitchen or in the servants' room, which were close at hand. We tried all the rooms as we went along, and in the dining room, dimly lit by rays of light through the shutters, found 4 servant women lying on the floor. There was no need to think them dead, for their stertorous breathing and the acrid smell of laudanum, however that's pronounced, in the room left no doubt as to their condition. Van Helsing and I looked at each other, and as we moved away, he said, "We can attend to them later." Then we ascended to Lucy's room. For an instant or two, we paused at the door to listen, but there was no sound that we could hear. With white faces and trembling hands, we opened the door gently and entered the room. How shall I describe what I saw? On the bed lay 2 women, Lucy and her mother. The latter lay farthest in, and she was covered with a white sheet, the edge of which had been blown back by the draught of the broken window, showing the drawn, white face with a look of terror fixed upon it. By her side lay Lucy, with face white and still more drawn. The flowers which had been round her neck we found upon her mother's bosom, and her throat was bare, showing 2 little wounds, which we had noticed before, but looking horribly white and mangled. Without a word, the professor bent over the bed, his head almost touching poor Lucy's breast. Then he gave a quick turn of his head, as of one who listens, and leaping to his feet, he cried out to me, "It is not yet too late! Quick, bring the brandy!" I flew downstairs and returned with it, taking care to smell and taste it too, lest it too were drugged like the decanter of sherry which I found on the table. The maids were still breathing, but more restlessly, and I fancied that the narcotic was wearing off. I did not stay to make sure, but returned to Van Helsing. He rubbed the brandy, as on another occasion, on her lips and gums, and on her wrist and the palms of her hand. He said to me, "I can do this. All that can be at the present. You go wake those maids. Flick them in the face with a wet towel." I wasn't expecting that. Just roll up a towel and go. and flick them hard. Just really crack it at them. Make them get heat and fire in a warm bath. This poor soul is nearly as cold as that beside her. She will need be heated before we can do anything more. I went at once and found little difficulty in waking 3 of the women. The 4th was only a young girl, and the drug had evidently affected her more strongly. So I lifted her on the sofa and let her sleep. The others were dazed at first, but as remembrance came back to them, they cried and sobbed in a hysterical manner. I was stern with them, however, and would not let them talk. I told them that 1 life was bad enough to lose, and that if they delayed, they would sacrifice Miss Lucy. So, sobbing and crying, they went about their way, half-clad as they were, and prepared fire and water. Fortunately, the kitchen and boiler fires were still alive, and there was no lack of hot water. We got a bath and carried Lucy out as she was and placed her in it. Whilst we were busy chafing her limbs, there was a knock at the hall door. One of the maids ran off, hurried on some more clothes, and opened it. Then she returned and whispered to us there was a gentleman who had come with a message from Mr. Holmwood. I bade her simply tell him that he must wait, for we could see no one now. She went away with the message, and engrossed with our work, I clean forgot all about him. Give me 1 second. It's dark out, so I can open my window now, finally. 1 moment, guys. Okay. Sun's gone, so I can open the shades. Where was I? I clean forgot. Here we go. I never saw in all my experience the professor work in such a deadly earnest. I knew, as he knew, that it was a stand-up fight with death, and in a pause told him so. He answered me in a way that I did not understand, but with the sternest look that his face could swear. If that were all, I would stop here where we are now, and let her fade away into peace, for I see no light of life over her horizon. He went on with his work, if possible, renewed and more frenzied vigor. Presently, we both began to be conscious that the heart was beginning to be of some effect. Heat, not art. Lucy's heart beat a trifle more audibly to the stethoscope. Her lungs had a perceptible movement. Van Helsing's face almost beamed. And as we lifted her from the bath and rolled her in a hot sheet to dry her, he said to me, "The first gain is ours. Check to the king." What does that mean? We took Lucy into another room, which had by now been prepared, and laid her in bed and forced a few drops of brandy down her throat. I noticed that Van Helsing tied a soft silk handkerchief round her throat. She was still unconscious and was quite as bad as, if not worse than, we had ever seen her. You know the throat lozenge. Seen her. Van Helsing called in one of the women and told her to stay with her and not take her eyes off her till we had returned, and then beckoned me out of the room. "You must consult as to what is to be done," he said as we descended the stairs. In the hall, he opened the dining room door, and as we passed in, he closed the door carefully behind him. The shutters had been opened, but the blinds were already down. With that obedience to the etiquette of death, which the British woman of the lower classes always rigidly observes. Shutters open, blinds down. I guess that's a folksy way of people being in mourning over there. I haven't heard that before. The room was therefore, dimly dark. It was, however, light enough for our purposes. Van Helsing's sternness was somewhat relieved by a look of perplexity. He was evidently torturing his mind about something, so I waited for an instant, and he spoke. What are we to do now? Where are we to turn for help? We must have another transfusion of blood, and that soon, or that poor girl's life won't be worth an hour's purchase. You are exhausted already. I am exhausted too. I fear to trust these women, even if they would have the courage to submit. What are we to do for someone who will open his veins for her? What's the matter with me anyhow? The voice came from the sofa across the room, and its tones brought relief and joy to my heart, for they were those of Quincy Morris. Van Helsing started angrily at the first sound, but his face softened and a glad look came into his eyes as he cried out, "Quincy Morris!" and rushed towards him with outstretched hands. Have we met him before? Oh, is Quincy the cowboy? The Texas suitor of Lucy way back when? I think so, maybe. That's my best guess on who the hell he is. I don't know why Van Helsing would know him, though. Huh. What brought you here? I cried as our hands met. I guess art is the cause. He handed me a telegram. Have not heard from Seward for 3 days, and I'm terribly anxious. Cannot leave. Father, still in same condition. Send me word how Lucy is. Do not delay. Homewood. I think it's Arthur Homewood. Yeah, so then Quincy definitely is the cowboy, because it was Quincy, Arthur, and Dr. Seward were 3 bros who were all competing to be Lucy's fiance. Arthur won, but all 3 bros were still bros. Assuming I'm correct. I'm guessing that's who Quincy Morris is, but I think that's correct. I think I came in just the nick of time. You know I have only... you know you have only to tell me what to do. Van Helsing strode forward and took his hand, looking him straight in the eyes as he said, "A brave man's blood is the best thing on this earth when a woman is in trouble. You're a man, and no mistake. Well, the devil may work against us for all he's worth, but God sends us men when we want them." That's a hell of a quote. Once again, we went through that ghastly operation. I have not the heart to go through with the details. Lucy had got a terrible shock, and it told on her more than before. For though plenty of blood went into her veins, her body did not respond to the treatment as well as the other occasions. Her struggle back into life was something frightful to see and hear. However, the action of both heart and lungs improved, and Van Helsing made a subcutaneous injection of morphia, as before, with good effect. Her faint became a profound slumber. The professor watched whilst I went downstairs with Quincy Morris and sent one of the maids to pay off one of the cabmen who were waiting. I left Quincy lying down after having a glass of wine and told the cook to get ready a good breakfast. Then a thought struck me, and I went back to the room where Lucy now was. When I came softly in, I found Van Helsing with a sheet or 2 of notepaper in his hand. He had evidently read it and was thinking it over as he sat with his hand to his brow. There was a look of grim satisfaction on his face, as if one who has had a doubt solved. He handed me the paper, saying only, "It dropped from Lucy's breast when we carried her to the bath." When I had read it, I stood looking at the professor, and after a pause asked him, "In God's name, what does it all mean? Was she, or is she mad, or what sort of horrible danger is it?" I was so bewildered, I did not know what to say more. Van Helsing put out his hand and took the paper, saying, "Do not trouble about it now. Forget it for the present. You shall know and understand it all in good time. but it will be later. And now, what is it that you came to me to say? This brought me back to fact, and I was all myself again. I came to speak about the certificate of death. If we do not act properly and wisely, there may be an inquest, and that paper would have to be produced. I am in hopes that we need have no inquest, for if we had it, it would surely kill poor Lucy, if nothing else did. I know, and you know, and that other doctor who attended her knows, that Mrs. Westenra had disease of the heart, but we can certify that she died of it. Let us fill up the certificate at once, and I shall take it myself to the registrar and go on the undertaker. Good. Oh, my friend John. Well thought of. Truly, Miss Lucy, if she be sad in the foes that beset her, is at least happy in the friends that love her. 1, 2, 3, all open their veins for her, besides one old man. Yes, I know, friend John. I am not blind. I love you all the more for it. Now go. In the hall, I met Quincy Morris. I have a hard time not just up-pitching that name because it's fun. Quincy Morris. With a telegram for Arthur, telling him that Mrs. Westenra was dead. That Lucy also had been ill, but was now going on better. And that Van Helsing and I were with her. I told him where I was going, and he hurried me out, but as I was going said, "When you come back, Jack, may I have 2 words with you all to ourselves?" I nodded in reply and went out. I found no difficulty about the registration and arranged with the local undertaker to come up in the evening to measure for the coffin and to make arrangements. When I got back, Quincy was waiting for me. I told him I would see him as soon as I knew about Lucy and went up to her room. She was still sleeping, and the professor seemingly had not moved from his seat at her side. From his putting his finger to his lips, I gathered that he expected her to wake before long and was afraid of her stalling nature. So I went down to Quincy and told him into the breakfast room, and took him, not told him, where the blinds were not drawn down, and which was a little more cheerful, or rather less cheerless, than the other rooms. When we were alone, he said to me, "Jack Seward, I don't want to shove myself in anywhere where I've no right to be, but this is no ordinary case. You know I love that girl and wanted to marry her, but although that's all past and gone, I can't help feeling anxious about her all the same. What is it that's wrong with her? The Dutchman, and a fine old fellow he is. I can see that. Said that time you 2 came into the room, that you must have another transfusion of blood, and that both you and he were exhausted. Now I know well that you medical men speak in camera, and that a man must not expect to know what they consult about in private. But this is no common matter, and whatever it is, I have done my part. Is not that so?" "That's so," I said, and he went on. "I take it that both you and Van Helsing had done already what I did today. Is that not so?" "That's so. And I guess Art was in on it too. When I saw him 4 days ago, down at his own place, he looked queer." Different word back then. "I have not seen anything pulled down so quick since I was on the Pampas. I had a mare that I was fond of go to grass all in the night." What? "And I had a mare that I was fond of go to grass all in the night." I think I know what he's saying, and I'm not going to elaborate. "One of those big bats that they call vampires had got at her in the night." Okay, he was saying something different, thank God. "And what with this gorge and the vein left open, there wasn't enough blood in her to get her to stand up, and I had to put a bullet through her as she lay, Jack. If you may tell me without betraying confidence, Arthur was the first. Is not that so?" As he spoke, the poor fellow looked terribly anxious. He was in a torture of suspense regarding the woman he loved, and his utter ignorance of the terrible mystery which seemed to surround her intensified his pain. His very heart was bleeding, and it took all the manhood of him, and there was a royal lot of it too, to keep him from breaking down. I paused before answering, for I felt that I must not betray anything which the professor wished kept secret. But he already knew so much, and guessed so much, that there could be no reason for not answering. So I answered in the same phrase, "That's so." "And how long has this been going on?" "About 10 days. 10 days! Then I guess, Jack Seward, that poor pretty creature that we all love has had put into her veins within that time the blood of 4 strong men. Man alive, her whole body wouldn't hold it." Then, coming close to me, he spoke in a fierce half-whisper. "What took it out?" I shook my head. "That," I said, "is the crux. Van Helsing is simply frantic about it, and I am at my wit's end. I can't even hazard a guess. There's been a series of little circumstances which have thrown out all of our calculations as to Lucy being properly watched. But these should not occur again. Here we stay until all be well, or ill." Quincy held out his hand. "Count me in," he said. "You and the Dutchman will tell me what to do, and I'll do it." See, I can do his folksy accent, doesn't bug me, because it's not cutting off letters and adding them randomly to imitate folksy. It's intelligent folksy. There's a difference. When she woke late in the afternoon, Lucy's first movement was to feel in her breast, and to my surprise, produce the paper which Van Helsing had given me to read. The careful professor had replaced it where it had come from, lest on waking she should be alarmed. Alarmed? Her eye then lit on Van Helsing, and on me too, and gladdened. Then she looked around the room, and seeing where she was, shuddered. She gave a loud cry, and put her poor, thin hands before her pale face. We both understood what that meant, that she had realized to the full her mother's death. So we tried what we could to comfort her. Doubtless sympathy eased her somewhat, but she was very low in thought and spirit, and wept silently and weakly for a long time. We told her that either or both of us would now remain with her all the time, and that seemed to comfort her. Towards dusk, she fell into a doze. Here, a very odd thing occurred. While still asleep, she took the paper from her breast and tore it in two. Van Helsing stepped over and took the pieces from her. All the same, however, she went on with the action of tearing, as though the material were still in her hands. Finally, she lifted her hands and opened them, as though scattering the fragments. Van Helsing seemed surprised, and his brows gathered, as if in thought. But he said nothing. So Lucy is clearly still mesmerized, hypnotized, whatever, by Dracula, and Dracula somehow knew that she had the paper? So Dracula must be spying on them somehow. The 19th of September. All last night she slept fitfully, being always afraid to sleep, and something weaker when she woke from it. The professor and I took turns to watch, and we never left her a moment unattended. Quincy Morris said nothing about his intention, but I knew that all night long he patrolled round and round the house. When the day came, its searching light showed the ravages in poor Lucy's strength. She was hardly able to turn her head, and the little nourishment which she could take seemed to do her no good. At times she slept, and both Van Helsing and I noticed the difference in her between sleeping and waking. Whilst asleep, she looked stronger, although more haggard, and her breathing was softer. Her open mouth showed the pale gums drawn back from the teeth, which thus looked positively longer and sharper than usual. When she woke, the softness of her eyes evidently changed. When she woke, the softness of her eyes evidently changed the expression, for she looked at her own self, although a dying one. In the afternoon, she asked for Arthur, and we telegraphed for him. Quincy went off to meet him at the station. Oh, she turning. When he arrived, it was nearly 6 o'clock, and the sun was setting full and warm, and the red light streamed in through the window and gave more color to the pale cheeks. When he saw her, Arthur was simply choking with emotion, and none of us could speak. In the hours that had passed, the fits of sleep, or the comatose condition that passed for it, had grown more frequent, so that the pauses when conversation was possible were shortened. Arthur's presence, however, seemed to act as a stimulant. She rallied a little and spoke to him more brightly than she had done since we arrived. He too pulled himself together and spoke as cheerily as he could, so that the best was made of everything. It was now nearly 1 o'clock, and he and Van Helsing are sitting with her. I am to relieve them in a quarter of an hour, and I am entering this on Lucy's phonograph. Until 6 o'clock, they are to try to rest. I fear that tomorrow will end our watching, for the shock has been too great. The poor child cannot rally. God help us all. Oh man, Mina's writing. Mina don't know nothing. Letter from Mina Harker to Lucy Westenra, unopened by her, dated the 17th of September. My dearest Lucy, it seems an age since I heard from you, or indeed since I wrote. You will pardon me, I know, for all my faults when you have read all my budget of news. Well, I got my husband back all right. When we arrived at Exeter, there was a carriage waiting for us, and in it, though we had an attack of gout, Mr. Hawkins. That can be confused with Harker. Why are they so similar? I keep mixing them up before. He took us to his house, where there were rooms for us all nice and comfortable, and we dined together. After dinner, Mr. Hawkins said, My dears, I want to drink to your health and prosperity, and may every blessing tend you both. I know you both from children, and have with love and pride seen you grown up. Now I want you to make your home here with me. I have left to me neither chick nor child. All are gone, and in my will I have left you everything. I cried, Lucy dear, as Jonathan and the old man clasped hands. Our evening was a very, very happy one. So here we are, installed in this beautiful old house, and from both my bedroom and the drawing room, I can see the great elms of the cathedral close, with the great black stem standing out against the old yellow stone of the cathedral. And I can hear the rooks overhead, cawing and chattering and gossiping all day. After the manner of rooks and humans, I am busy, I need not tell you, arranging things in housekeeping. Jonathan and Mr. Hawkins are busy all day, for now that Jonathan is a partner, Mr. Hawkins wants to tell him all about the clients. How's your dear mother getting on? Oh, no. Don't talk about the mother. I wish I could run up to town for a day or two to see you, dear, but I dare not go yet, with so much on my shoulders, and Jonathan wants looking after still. He is beginning to put some flesh on his bones again, but he was terribly weakened by the long illness. Even now, he sometimes starts out of his sleep in a sudden way and awakes all trembling until I can coax him back into his usual placidity. However, thank God, these occasions grow less frequent as the days go on. and they will, in time, pass away altogether, I trust. And now, I have told you my news. Let me ask yours. When are you to be married, and where, and who is to perform the ceremony, and what are you to wear, and is it to be a public or a private wedding? Tell me all about it, dear. Tell me all about everything. For there's nothing which interests you which will not be dear to me. Jonathan asked me to send his respectful duty, whatever that means. But I do not think that's good enough from the junior partner of the important firm Hawkins and Harker. And so, as you love me, and he loves me, and I love you with all the moods and tenses of the verbs, I send you simply his love instead. Goodbye, my dearest Lucy, and all the blessings on you. Yours, Mina Harker. So Lucy's fucking dead, ain't she? After that letter, she is so dead. That is some thick layering to indirectly tell us that Lucy is fucking dead. Well, undead now, probably. She's turning. I knows it. I knows it. Okay. Report from Patrick Hennessy, MD, MRC, SLK, QCPI. Titles. Whatever, man. To Dr. John Stewart, MD. Less so. Dated the 20th of September. My dear sir, in accordance with your wishes, I enclose a report of the conditions of which everything left in my charge. I enclose a report of the conditions of everything left in my charge. I added a which in there. With regard to the patient, Renfield, there is more to say. He has had another outbreak, which may have had a dreadful ending, but which, as it fortunately happened, was unattended with any unhappy results. This afternoon, a carrier's cart with 2 men made a call at the empty house, whose ground a bit on ours, the house to which you will remember the patient twice ran away. The men stopped at our gate to ask the porter their way, as they were strangers. I was myself looking out of the study window, having a smoke after dinner, and saw one of them come up to the house. As he passed the window of Renfield's room, the patient began to rate him from within, and called him all the foul names he could lay his tongue to. The man, who seemed a decent enough fellow, contented himself by telling him to shut up for a foul-mouthed beggar. I'm well surprised he didn't say the C word. Whereon our man accused him of robbing him, and wanting to murder him, and said that he would hinder him if he were to swing for it. I opened the window and signed to the man not to notice, so he contented himself, after looking the place over, and making up his mind as to what kind of place he had got to by saying, Lord bless you, sir, I wouldn't mind what was said to me in a bloomin' madhouse. I pity ye and the governor for having to live in the house with a wild beast like that. Then, he asked his way civilly enough. I told him where the gate of the empty house was. He went away, followed by threats and curses and revilings from our man. I went down to see if I could make out any cause for his anger, since he is usually so a well-behaved man, and except for his violent fits, nothing of the kind had ever occurred. I found him, to my astonishment, quite composed and most genial in his manner. I tried to get him to talk of the incident, but he blandly asked me questions as to what I meant, and led me to believe that he was completely oblivious of the affair. It was, I am sorry to say, however, only another instance of his cunning, for within a half hour I heard of him again. This time, he had broken out through the window of his room, and was running down the avenue. One moment. I need Tylenol for my throat. Okay. Where was I? Avenue? I called to the attendants and he ran after him. I think that's it. I called to the attendants to follow me and ran after him, for I feared he was intent on some mischief. My fear was justified when I saw the same cart which had passed before coming down the road, having on it some great wooden boxes. The men were wiping their foreheads and were flushed in the face as if with violent exercise. Before I could get up to him, the patient rushed at them and pulling one of them off the cart, began to knock his head against the ground. If I had not seized him just at the moment, I believe he would have killed the man there and then. The other fellow jumped down and struck him over the head with the butt end of his heavy whip. It was a terrible blow, but he did not seem to mind it, but seized him also and struggled with the three of us, pulling us to and fro as if we were kittens. You know I am no lightweight, and the others were both burly men. At first, he was silent in his fighting, but as we began to master him, and the attendants were putting a straight waistcoat on him, he began to shout, "I'll frustrate them! They shan't rob me! They shan't murder me by inches! I'll fight for my lord and master!" And all sorts of similar incoherent ravings. It was with very considerable difficulty that they put him back to the house and put him in the padded room. One of the attendants, Hardy, had a finger broken. However, I will set it all right, and he is now going on well. The two carriers were at first loud in their threats of actions for damages and promised to rain all the penalties of the law on us. Their threats were, however, mingled with some sort of indirect apology for the defeat of the two of them by a feeble madman. They said that if it had not been for the way their strength had been spent carrying and raising the heavy boxes of the cart, they would have made short work of him. They gave us as another reason for their defeat the extraordinary state of drought to which they had been reduced by the dusty nature of their occupation, and the reprehensible distance from the scene of their labors of any place of public entertainment. I quite understood their drift, and after a stiff glass of grog, or rather more of the same, and with each a sovereign in hand, they made light of the attack, and swore they would encounter a worse madman any day for the pleasure of meeting so blooming a good bloke as their correspondent. Maybe they're Australian. I took their names and addresses, in case they might be needed. They are as follows. Jack Smollett. Smollett. That wouldn't be funny any year except for now. Smollett. I guess the past few years. Of Dudding's Rents, King George's Road, Great Walworth, and Thomas Snelling, Peter Farley's Row, Guide Court, Bethnal Green. They are both in the employment of Harris & Sons, Moving and Shipment Company, Orange Master Yards, Soho. I shall report to you any matter of interest occurring here, and shall wire you at once if there is anything of importance. Believe me, dear sir, yours faithfully, Patrick Hennessy. I don't like Hennessy's. My last insurance agent was a Hennessy. It was a dipshit. Ripped me off. Bastard Hennessy. Letter from Mina Harker to Lucy Westenra, unopened by her. Was the last one on the 18th? Next day. 18th of September. My dearest Lucy, such a sad blow has befallen us. Mr. Hawkins has died very suddenly. Some may not think it so sad for us. We had both come to love him that it really seems as though we had lost a father. I never knew either father or mother, so that dear old man's death is a real blow to me. Jonathan is greatly distressed. is not only that he feels sorrow, deep sorrow, for the dear, good man who has befriended him all his life, and now at the end has treated him like his own son, and left him a fortune, which to people of our modest bringing up is wealth beyond the dream of avarice. But Jonathan feels it on another account. He says the amount of responsibility which it puts upon him makes him very nervous. Whoops. He begins to doubt himself. I try to cheer him up, and my belief in him helps him to have a belief in himself. But it is here that the grave shock of that the grave shock he experienced tells upon him the most. Oh, it is too hard that a sweet, simple, noble, strong nature such as his, a nature which enabled him by our dear, good friend's aid to rise from a clerk to master in a few years, should be so injured that the very essence of its strength is gone. Forgive me, dear, if I worry you with my troubles in the midst of your own happiness. But Lucy, dear, I must tell someone, for the strain of keeping up a brave and cheerful appearance to Jonathan tries me, and I have no one here that I can confide in. I dread coming up to London, as we must do the day after tomorrow, for poor Mr. Hawkins left in his will that he was to be buried in a grave with his father. As there are no relations at all, Jonathan will have to be the chief mourner. I shall try to run over to see you, dearest, if only for a few minutes. Forgive me for troubling you. With all blessings, your loving, Mina Harker. Dr. Seward's Diary. I was going to try and go for longer, but even with reading this much at once is hard work on the throat, apparently. Like an hour and a half. This tops. So I'm going to finish this chapter. I wanted to do more today, but that is what it is when you're reading this much. Dr. Seward on the 20th of September. Only resolution and habit can let it make an entry tonight. I am too miserable, too low-spirited, too sick of the world and all in it, including life itself, that I would not care if I heard this moment the flapping of the wings of the angel of death. And he has been flapping those grim wings to some purpose of late. Lucy's mother and Arthur's father now. Let me get on with my work. I duly relieve Van Helsing in his watch over Lucy. Was this the 20th? Okay. We wanted Arthur to go to rest also, but he refused at first. It was only when I told him that we should want him to help us during the day, and that we must not all break down for want of rest. How many more pages of this chapter? Okay, this is the last part. I'll get through it. If it's going to keep going on, I might just call it, because I'm losing my ability to read, apparently. It was only when I told him that we should want him to help us during the day, and that we must not all break down for want of rest, lest Lucy should suffer, that he agreed to go. Van Helsing was very kind to him. Come, my child, he said. Come with me. You are sick and weak, and have had much sorrow and much mental pain, as well as that tax on your strength that we know of. You must not be alone, for to be alone is to be full of fears and alarms. Come to the drawing room. There is a big fire, and there are 2 sofas. You shall lie on one, and I on the other, and our sympathy will be comfort to each other, even though we do not speak, and even if we sleep. Arthur went off with him, casting back a longing look on Lucy's face, which lay in her pillow, almost whiter than the lawn. Grass is green. What? Did lawn mean something different back then? Whatever, moving on. She lay quite still, and I looked round the room to see that all was as it should be. I could see that the professor had carried out in this room, as in the other, his purpose of using the garlic. The whole of the window sashes reeked of it, and round Lucy's neck, over the silk handkerchief which Van Helsing made her keep on, was a rough chaplet of the same odorous flowers. Lucy was breathing somewhat stertorously, and her face was at its worst, for the open mouth showed the pale gums. Her teeth, in the dim, uncertain light, seemed longer and sharper than they had been in the morning. In particular, by some trick of the light, the canine teeth looked longer and sharper than the rest. I sat down by her, and presently she moved uneasily. At the same moment, there came a sort of dull flapping or buffeting at the window. I went over to it softly and peeped out by the corner of the blind. There was a full moonlight, and I could see that the noise was made by a great bat, which wheeled round, doubtless attracted by the light, although so dim. No, that would be attracted by sound. I don't care about light. When I came back to my seat, I found that Lucy had moved slightly and had torn away the garlic flowers from her throat. I replaced them as well as I could and sat with her. Presently, she woke, and I gave her food, as Van Helsing had prescribed. She took a little, and that languidly. There did not seem to be with her now the unconscious struggle for life and strength that had hitherto so marked her illness. It struck me as curious that the moment she became conscious, she pressed the garlic flowers close to her. It was certainly odd that whenever she got into that lethargic state, with the stertorous breathing, she put the flowers from her. But that when she waked, she clutched them close. There is no possibility of making any mistake about this, for in the long hours that followed, she had many spells of sleeping and waking, and repeated both actions many times. At 6 o'clock, Van Helsing came to relieve me. Arthur had then fallen into a doze, and he mercifully let him sleep on. When he saw Lucy's face, I could hear the sissings and drawl of his breath, and he said to me in a sharp whisper, "Drop the blind, I want light." Then he bent down, with his face almost touching Lucy's, examined her carefully. He removed the flowers and lifted the silk handkerchief from her throat. As he did so, he started back, and I could hear his ejaculation. Mein Gott! As it was smothered in his throat, I bent over and looked too, and as I noticed, some queer chill came over me. The wounds on the throat had absolutely disappeared. For fully 5 minutes, Van Helsing stood looking at her, with his face looking at its sternness. Then he turned to me and said calmly, "She is dying. It will not be long now. There will be much difference, mark me. Whether she dies conscious or in her sleep, wake that poor boy, let him come and see the last. He trusts us, and we have promised him." I think they're about to try and put her down. Like Quincy Morris said with his horse. I went to the dining room and waked him. He was dazed for a moment, but when he saw the sunlight streaming in through the edges of the shutters, he thought he was late and expressed fear. I assured him that Lucy was still asleep, but told him as gently as I could that both Van Helsing and I feared that the end was near. He covered his face with his hands and slid down on his knees by the sofa, where he remained perhaps a minute, with his head buried, praying whilst his shoulders shook with grief. I took him by the hand and raised him up. "Come," I said, "my dear old fellow, summon all your fortitude. It will be best and easiest for her." When we came into Lucy's room, I could see that Van Helsing had, with his usual forethought, been putting matters straight and making everything look as pleasing as possible. He had even brushed Lucy's hair, so that it lay on the pillow in its usual sunny ripples. When we came into the room, she opened her eyes, and seeing him, whispered softly, "Arthur! Oh my love, I am so glad you have come." He was stooping to kiss her when Van Helsing motioned him back. "No," he whispered. "Not yet." Hold her hand. It will comfort her more. So Arthur took her hand and knelt beside her, and she looked her best, with all the soft lines matching the angelic beauty of her eyes. Then gradually, her eyes closed, and she sank to sleep. For a little bit, her breast heaved softly, and her breath came and went like a tired child's. And then insensibly, there came the strange change which I had noticed in the night. Her breathing grew stertorous. The mouth opened, and the pale gums, drawn back, made the teeth look longer and sharper than ever. In a sort of sleep-waking, vague, unconscious way, she opened her eyes, which were now dull and hard at once, and said in a soft, voluptuous voice, such as I had never heard from her lips, "Arthur, oh my love, I am so glad you have come. Kiss me." Arthur bent eagerly over to kiss her, but at that instant, Van Helsing, who like me had been startled by her voice, swooped upon him, and catching him by the neck with both hands, dragged him back with a fury of strength which I never thought he could have possessed, and actually hurled him almost across the room. "Not for your life," he said. "Not for your living soul and hers." And he stood between them like a lion at bay. Arthur was so taken aback that he did not for a moment know what to do or say. And before any impulse of violence could seize him, he realized the place and occasion and stood silent, waiting. "Hey, Azura, hope you're doing well." I kept my eyes fixed on Lucy, as did Van Helsing, and we saw a spasm as of rage flit like a shadow over her face. The sharp teeth champed together. Then her eyes closed, and she breathed heavily. Very shortly after she opened her eyes in all their softness, and putting out her poor. Sometimes these words get me. Putting out her poor, pale, thin hand, took Van Helsing's great brown one, drawing it to her. She kissed it. "My true friend," she said in a faint voice, but with untellable pathos. "My true friend, and his, oh guard him, and give me peace." "I swear it," he said solemnly, kneeling beside her and holding up his hand, as one who registers an oath. Then he turned to Arthur and said to him, "Come, my child, take her hand in yours and kiss her on the forehead, and only once." Their eyes met instead of their lips, and so they parted. Lucy's eyes closed, and Van Helsing, who had been watching closely, took Arthur's arm and drew him away. And then Lucy's breathing became stertorous again, and all at once it ceased. "It is all over," said Van Helsing. "She is dead." I took Arthur by the arm and led him away to the drawing room, where he sat down and covered his face with his hands, sobbing in a way that nearly broke me down to see. I went back into the room and found Van Helsing looking at poor Lucy, and his face was sterner than ever. Some change had come over her body. Death had given back part of her beauty. Her brown cheeks had recovered some of their flowing lines. Even the lips had lost their deadly pallor. It was as if the blood, no longer needed for the working of the heart, had gone to make the harshness of death as little rude as might be. We thought her dying while she slept, and sleeping when she died. I stood beside Van Helsing and said, "Ah, well, poor girl. There's peace for her at last. It is the end." He turned to me and said with grave solemnity, "Not so. Alas, not so. It is only the beginning." When I asked him what he meant, he only shook his head and answered, "We can do nothing as yet. Wait and see." Okay. Next will be chapter 13 for Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday. I had to think because I have today off. So I'm off a day on my mind. I wanted to do more today, but my throat is dying. Tomorrow, we will be playing a new game to me. Feed the Deep, which looks like a neat little horror diving game of sorts. But that will be for tomorrow. I hope everyone enjoyed some more Dracula for Halloween. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your Monday and a fantastic Tuesday tomorrow. I will see everyone at 1:30 a.m. tomorrow Eastern Time. Tomorrow night, 1:30 a.m., not 1:30 this morning. My times are all screwed up because I stream normally in the AM. I'll see you at tomorrow night, 1:30 a.m., not this night. Take care, everyone. I'll see you later for Feed the Deep.